Thank you very much. My presentation will kind of be related in some way to Venerable Khentrul Rinpoche's presentation, although this will deal, as you know now, with a different geographical area, Mongolia. What I will look in this paper is I'm interested to examine the role of imagination and visualization in the Vajrayana, because it's a part of almost every Vajrayana practice. However, in Western philosophy, lots has been written about imagination, but when you look in different definitions and descriptions of imagination within Western philosophical traditions, you see that they are missing something, and that is that epistemological aspect, that is to say, question whether actually imagination provides a new type of knowledge. And so I wanted to look in two different types of texts to see whether actually when we look in a Buddhist Vajrayana, imagination and visualization, do they actually tell us something about it? And so in this paper, I will limit my discussion to two types of ritual texts composed by different Mongolian scholastics who lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One of them is called The Entrance to the Ocean of a collection of tantras, How to Read the Glorious Kalachakra Tantra, which was composed by a Lama by name Agramba by Lusan Choizin. And I will also compare it and look, as time allows, to the Sri Mongolian Pova text pertaining to rebirth in Shambhala. I chose this text for discussion here for several reasons, because practices described in this text involve a cultivation of various types of imagination and visualization that share similar features in that they are non-arbitrary, they are individuated, and they are intentional. Lots of imagination takes place unintentionally too. Yet they mutually differ with regard to that they have a different contents and structures. That these are prescribed processes of imagination. So one cannot just imagine whatever one feels like, right? And the roles that they have in these practices are different. Therefore, they can, I believe, shed some light on the nature and different functions of imagination in Vajrayana Buddhism. But let me begin briefly examining this text, How to Read the Glorious Kalachakra Tantra. According to the text, I will describe you briefly the practice so that we can then understand better my arguments. After generating bodhicitta and promising to acquire the Kalachakra Tantra literary corpus, to read it, to reflect upon its meaning, and recite it for the sake of attaining the state of Vajradhara, the Tantric adept is told to engage in the set of practices of imagination. First, having taken on the identity of a Kalachakra deity in order to purify and transform the inanimate worlds and their inhabitants, he is to imagine the light rays emanating from himself in the form of Kalachakra, cleansing the defects and faults of the inanimate and animate worlds and transforming them into celestial mansions and infinitely pure gods and goddesses. After divinizing the world in this way, he must further sacralize this transformed world by reciting and simultaneously imagining in the sky in front of himself the Guru and the assembly of the deities of the Kalachakra Mandala, the tutelary deities of the four classes of Tantras, countless jhinas and bodhisattvas to be present right in front of him. To them he pays homage, asks them for blessings of being imaginatively inviting the assemblies of Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Vidyadharas, sages, and the six classes of beings to come into his presence and listen with faith and reverence his recitation of the Kalachakra Tantra. Then he should imagine them arriving and sitting down with delight to listen to the Tantra. In the imagined center of the limitless realm of space, filled with an ocean of assemblies of the Viras and Dakinis, he is to recite the clear words of the Kalachakra Tantra in a pleasant and melodious manner. While doing so, he must imagine again that within each atom of his body, visualize the Kalachakra deity, there are Kalachakra mandalas equal to the disk encompassing the space, and in the center of their atoms, the divine forms throughout the limitless Dharmatatu. So he imagines them proclaiming the words of Tantra with 1,000 resembling and simultaneous bursts of 1,000 rolls of thunder. As for the text in front of him, he must imagine that the golden letters written on a lapis lazuli pages of the scriptures are appearing as blazing rays of light and being of the nature of the renunciation and realization of the Buddha Kalachakra's mind. With this, then he is to visualize the light of ambrosias of the 5 colors emanating from the pages of the text, with each letter expressing its own sound of an unpronounced echo, and to imagine that words of the Tantra are clearly proclaimed from all the facets of the experience of the inanimate and inanimate worlds. After that, he should imagine that all sentient beings' sins and mental obscurations, imprints, and so on are purified, and the sentient beings of the 3 realms are experiencing Buddhahood in the form of Kalachakra. In particular, he is to imagine that evil thoughts and actions of malevolent beings who are difficult to subdue are pacified, and the harms of epidemics, conflicts, famine, frost, hail, and so on, in all the realms of the world are brought to an end, and that the magnificent prosperity and well-being of samsara and nirvana are increased. So, at the conclusion, then, he is to imagine the mind streams of those who came to listen to the Dharma or to his recitation to be ripened and liberated, and then they depart into their own individual Buddha fields. Now, as we have seen, in this ritual practice of reading the Tantra, multiple processes of imaginations are arranged in a particular sequence in accordance with their desired outcomes, starting with the self-transformation through self-divinization, from where the spatial and temporal purifications are performed, as well as the sacralization of the text and the very act of reading, and then ending with imaginative pacification and liberation of the minds of all sentient beings. Although the aspirative aspect of the processes of imagination in this practice seem to be their fundamental aspect, various contents of individual processes of imagination add to them other aspects as well. Thus, we find that at times an aspirative imagination is also objectual, having imagined deities, atoms, mandalas, and so on. And it's also propositional when the deities are proclaiming the words of the Tantra sounding like thunder. In other instances, we see a combination of objectual and participatory types of imagination, in which the practitioner is also an active participant in the imagined event, as he emanates lights, invites Shravakas, and so on. So in that process of imagination, it is not merely cognitive, but also verbal. So while the guidelines for this practice of reading the Tantra are based on the premise that the described processes of imaginations are conduits in bringing change to cognitive aspect of the mind for the practitioner and those in his close and distant environments, for some more interesting questions may be whether there is an epistemological aspect. That is to say, does a practitioner requires new type of knowledge that hadn't had before while reading this text through this practice of imagination? And if so, what would that be? So I will open this one for later discussion. I will not say right now what I think, because I want to get to a new practice, to these Pova practices for rebirth in Shambhala, which are described in 3 different texts that I have looked for. In these practices, the process of imagination activates not only mental and verbal participation, but also physical one through the bodily ritual practices. In these practices, imagination integrates multifarious, concurrent, and complementary cognitive activities. Mental imagery is created, evoked, manipulated, and complementary cognitive activities as well. It's derived from a previous perception of visual presentations of Kalachakra, Tantra, and Shambhala as depicted in paintings and described in texts. The Tantric adept is instructed to display an image of Kalachakra and the layout of Shambhala as a general support of his body, speech, and mind prior to engaging in an actual practice of the transference of consciousness. So here we find the interweaving of the processes of imagining Shambhala and the perception of its visual representation in the paintings, in which these rigid boundaries between imagination and perceptions are diminished because the perception of mental imagery is thus co-determined not only by external visual and linguistic factors, but also by imaginary refinements of the reproduced external world of Shambhala. An imaginative visualization of Shambhala, its kings and inhabitants, is discursive, intersubjective, and symbolic structures of that world. Like in the aforementioned practice of reading the Kalachakra Tantra, here too, mental images and their cognitive effects are hidden away from the external observer who is other than the visualized audience. Visualized images remain within the inner subjective space and discrete experience. They are shaped by one's perspective and skill imagination. Moreover, in these Pova practices, we find the inwardly and outwardly oriented processes of visualization which involve some kind of imaginative self-transformation that is inwardly originating imagination precedes this externally oriented imagination. I'm skipping a lot, so sorry, that's why I'm slowing down. Those stages of the Pova practices that involve visualization of the land of Shambhala as a geographical space are outwardly oriented types of imaginations. In these practices, the visualization and imagination are closely connected. In some instances, an objectual imagination involves a mental construction of a visual image, while in other instances, when the imagined evades representation, a mental image is not visual actually, but is a mere thought. An example of this is a practice in which one imagines the essential nature of the external offerings and symbolic representation of Shambhala and its deity laid out on the altar. Their nature is that of primordial awareness, or yeshe. Okay, I'll have to skip because I think, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Oh, yeah. All right. I'll skip some. But I don't have time to describe the contents of this visualization. But what I can just tell you is that visualization of Shambhala becomes also a symbolic enactment of one's own visit to that land. Although an imagined experience of Shambhala is a temporal departure from the present time and space, it is deemed conducive to the future transcendence of time and space. It is a mental process in which one produces new mental imprints by means of the patterns contained in the mental image. This is in turn understood as a familiarization of the adept's mind with an actual place of Shambhala and its culture, which creates new memories conducive to the desirable bardo experience that leads one to Shambhala. But based on the premise that a mentally constructed image is not something other than the mind, then it is a reflection of the mind itself, and the degree of subtlety of a mentally created image is understood to correlate to the degree of the subtlety of the mind that creates it. It is on this premise that these texts structure a sequence of visualization practices that could bring about increasingly subtler vision of Shambhala and corresponding mental states. Okay, I'll skip again. So, imbued by intentionality, these practices catalyze visionary experiences of Shambhala and its inhabitants, deities, and the like. Whether in external or, whether in the context of preliminary practice or in the context of innermost Pova practices, one finds both the synchronicity of recitation and visualization practices and the turning away from the words of prayer and eulogy to silent images. Okay, I have to skip again. But imagining Shambhala's geographical location within the small Jambudvipa, one at the same time imagines the larger world itself. Ooh, 3 minutes. And so one goes from this external geographical place to something subtler, until Shambhala becomes basically the mind of clear light, becomes seen as the light, and something that is actually experienced in Bardo itself. Now that those imprints are created, then upon death, white light appears and leads one directly to Shambhala, which one now recognizes because one has become familiarized with this process through this process of imagination. And basically, then mind perceives itself as a spatial realm of light, and so on. So, okay, 1 minute. So as we have seen, then the processes of imagination and visualizations are ritual, translocal, and transhistorical processes that look beyond the present, visible world to the world that is not yet present to our sensory experiences. They entail not only bringing to mind an alternate reality and one's participation in it, but also creating it. The expressive capacities of mental images in these practices provide us with a venue for understanding the power of imagination in recreating the world and one's own experiences in it. So sorry for disconnected at times. So I can finish here.